Hello, everybody. Welcome to this month's MetroEHS sponsored webinar and podcast. I'm Dana. I am the marketing assistant here at MetroEHS. Um, uh, we will be sending this out as a recorded version to, the people that missed it or have to leave early. So don't worry, you will get it. I'm also going to turn this over to Chris right now. So Chris, if you want to take it away, that would be great.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Dana, can you hear me all right?
I can hear you.
Wonderful. Well, welcome everybody. I'm glad that you're here. I hope that you get something valuable for yourself from this brief presentation on augmentative and alternative communication and how we teach communication using that. So right now, please bear with me while I share my screen, and Dana is going to let me know if I am successful. And so far, so good. But now
Yes.
I want to turn it into a slideshow. And of course, this ribbon's in my way. Can I move that? Let's see. Oh, I can. There it is. Oh, sorry. Okay, this is a little bit new for me. All right, is it big, guys?
I can see it. You're good.
Perfect. Okay. Oh my goodness, that's me on the first page. So again, welcome everybody. I'm so thrilled that you're here, spending some time with MetroEHS today, learning something new. I want to wish everybody a happy Speech, Language, and Hearing Month. May is Speech, Language, and Hearing Month. So this is a great opportunity to focus on speech and language. Even though we're closing out May, it's still May. So hug a friendly neighborhood speech and language therapist or audiologist today or in the month of May. So thank you again. This is me, and I'm just going to advance. Hopefully we'll see the slide move. Did it go?
Yep.
Wonderful. Okay. So my name is Chris Krajewski. I am the Vice President of Therapy Services here at MetroEHS Pediatric Therapy. I am also a speech and language pathologist. And I am the mom of a person with communication challenges. So I feel like it gives me a really unique perspective to be able to look at communication and look at people and how they communicate in different ways, right? And understanding that most people, all people who communicate, sometimes just need a little bit of an adjustment in the environment in order to be successful. So that's something I've learned as a mom of a person with a communication challenge. I consider myself an ongoing student of communication and all communicators. Communication to me is an absolutely fascinating topic. I could talk about it all day. It is such a uniquely human thing that we are able to take what is up in here and convey it out to somebody else, and they can share in that very private space as we see fit. And so that to me is fascinating. And all communicators are different, so it's important to take that into consideration as well. Kind of knowing your audience, knowing yourself, and communicating to people in the way they need it to be communicated and the way they want things to be communicated. So I'm also passionate about meeting people where they are at and giving them the tools for engagement with others so that they can be successful in communication. It is all about understanding where the barriers are to communication and what sorts of tools we might have available to support them and those in their environment so that we can make communication happen. So that's me in a nutshell. So today's learning outcomes for our webinar series are for this installment in our series. Number one, I would love for you to learn more about how AAC, also known as Alternative and Augmentative Communication, how AAC supports the Communication Bill of Rights. Yes, there is one of those. There is a Bill of Rights that was especially developed for individuals who struggle to communicate, and we're going to learn more about that as well today. Number two, learn about the benefits of using AAC and specifically voice output AAC. Number three, understanding how we teach communication with AAC. And really realizing that as parents, as caregivers, as people out there in society, you're doing a lot already to teach communication with AAC. You just may not realize it. Number four, dispelling some common myths and concerns about using AAC and about communicating with people who use AAC. Number five, I would love for you to learn how to get started with AAC if you have questions or if that should be your path. And finally, number six, learning tips and tricks to help your AAC communicator flourish out there in their Wild West. That is their life. So here we go. Starting at basics here. What is communication, right? Sometimes people use the term communication synonymously with speech or with language or something very specific, but really in general, communication is, according to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, a process by which information is exchanged between individuals through a common system of symbols, signs, or behavior. All right, so that doesn't necessarily mean that communication is verbal speech, right? Verbal speech is a means of communication, but there are a lot of means of communication that we use as a group, right? So one thing that speech and language pathologists are very, very passionate about, and this is a quotation that comes from our credentialing organization known as ASHA, is that, quote, all people with a disability of any extent or severity have a basic right to affect through communication the conditions of their existence. That's a pretty important, powerful thing to be able to do, isn't it? And we want to set the stage so that anybody with any level of ability or skill set or disability is able to do that, to be able to impact the conditions of their own existence. We're pretty passionate about that. So how do we do that? How do we make sure people have the power to impact their own existence and their own environment? First and foremost is the mindset that we have as we approach these individuals. We presume competence with communication. Now, my daughter, just as an FYI, was born with Down syndrome. So when people see her out in the world, it's very evident by her facial features and by her appearance that something is not going to be the same. It's not going to be typical. The expectations may not be typical. But unfortunately, because of that, sometimes they have presumptions about her abilities that may not be accurate, right? We don't want to fall into that trap and that risk with anybody. We want to presume competence with communication. And this is a really wonderful quotation from Louise Hay that I thought was very impactful. Quote, if you accept a limiting belief, then it will become a truth for you. And sometimes that happens when we put a limitation or we anticipate a limitation on an individual with communication challenges, right? If that individual experiences those limitations often enough, they begin to believe it as well. And that is a real problem because we want everybody to be able to feel that they can participate in society, in engagement with other people. So if you accept a limiting belief, then it will become a truth for you. As a speech pathologist, I don't want to be that limiting factor. I want to be that opening factor that allows all of the possibilities to be potentially available, right? So the Communication Bill of Rights is something that was developed for individuals with severe disabilities to enable them to have, again, that impact on their own existence. So this is sort of a picture example of that Communication Bill of Rights. It says basically, I have the right, and you can read some of these little icons, and I'll just select a few important ones as we move forward. I have the right to say no, to refuse and reject choices. I have the right to ask for what I want. I have the right to share my feelings. I have the right to be taught how to communicate, right? Even if the typical manner of teaching and learning isn't available, everyone has the right to be taught how to communicate. And that's where your speech language pathologist and you as families and caregivers step in. I have the right to be spoken with, not about. I have a right to be a full and equal member of my community. This is what speech pathologists advocate. This is what we strive for. And it isn't just about providing our client with tools. It's also about providing our community with tools and awareness as well. So what is AAC? We talked about it briefly. This is the topic of our webinar today. It stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication, AAC. So I'll be using that acronym frequently throughout this time that we're spending together. So what is AAC? In a very general sense, AAC is all of the ways that someone communicates besides talking. And also to know that people of all ages can use AAC if they have trouble with speech or language skills. So anything that isn't verbal language and verbal speech can be considered augmentative communication. So here are some examples of things that are augmentative or alternative communication systems. In the upper left-hand corner, you see what looks like a binder with rings. And some pictures associated with it. And you might see those little tabs for organization at the bottom of the binder. This is something that we would call a low technology AAC system. And it is generally just a very well organized set of pictures that our individual has put together that help them to get wants, needs, thoughts, ideas, loves, dislikes out there to the world. Right. And often this is done by pointing to the pictures, or in some cases, there may be a Velcro attached picture that can be pulled off of the page and handed to a communication partner. But that is a low tech version. Over to the right, on the upper right, you can see the home page of an iPad that is loaded with an AAC software. This is considered a high-tech version of AAC. And it is, as I said, something that might be on an iPad or a device of similarity, right? Doesn't have to be an iPad. And it is basically a touch screen. And it allows our communicator to select the words and to find other words by opening folders that are very well organized within there. So they can put sentences together, and this has a voice output. So this talks out loud in lieu of our client's voice, right? This is their voice. So you can hear this one taking place. On the bottom row, you see on the left somebody using some sort of sign or gestural language. That is also considered an AAC system. This is something that people use to augment or instead of verbal speech to communicate with a group who understands the same system. And then another example on the bottom, good old-fashioned writing, using pictures, using writing, using this to enable you to communicate what is up here can also be considered an AAC system. Maybe you can think of some other things as well. So who in our community benefits from using some form of augmentative and alternative communication? Very generally, anybody with something to say, right? Who has a difficult time speaking it can use an augmentative communication system. So all people of all ages can use AAC if they have trouble with speech or language skills, straight from ASHA, right? We don't restrict this to only certain people who qualify for augmentative and alternative communication. We want to enable all people to have that impact on their own existence, on their own environment, by being able to communicate and engage with other people. So why do we love AAC? Why do I, as a speech pathologist, love AAC? I love it because it helps me to help people have an impact on their own circumstances and their own existence. That is what I love about AAC. So it allows individuals to self-report using their own words, which can be very important. It can be very common for us to see some sort of thing happening with somebody and make an assumption about how they're feeling or what they're thinking, but we can't always really like know, right, what's going on inside somebody else's mind unless they're able to express it. And if they don't have words to do that, it can be very frustrating. So it allows individuals to talk about themselves in their own words, which is really important. We all want to be able to use our own words and our own voice. In addition, it empowers other people to have a choice to communicate it empowers our people to have a choice to communicate. If you think about it, communication is not always a requirement. Yeah, sometimes we have to communicate with other people for sure, but we do have a choice. And that is part of the Communication Bill of Rights, right? We want to empower people to communicate with whom they want, when they want, and how they want. Those are the big three for AAC and for the Communication Bill of Rights. So it empowers people to have that choice to communicate or not to. It reduces frustration when people are unable to communicate. If anybody knows a young child learning language and still not quite having it all meshed together for verbal speech, you've seen that frustration taking place, right? And I myself can feel frustrated when I'm having trouble expressing a thought in a clear way. So it is so much more wonderful to be able to get through your day and not be frustrated. Imagine if you had a very reduced ability to communicate and you had something important to say, how frustrating that would be. And then finally, it fosters engagement and connection with other people. And that is the whole point of communication. And that is really where I come from as a speech and language pathologist, right? My job is to help people to engage in a way that they want to engage with others. We live in a society, we live in groups, we tend to kind of really gravitate toward other people. Have you ever spent a whole day by yourself and then by the end of the day, you might want to call a friend and blah, 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 right? It just feels good. It feels good to have that engagement with somebody else. And we want everyone to be able to experience that to the fullest extent. So I wanted to talk specifically about voice output AAC. Also, we call it our high-tech AAC option, and that is that sort of that device with the touch screen and all of the organization that helps us to enable our kiddos to have words and to communicate. Voice output AAC in particular, in my experience, is really a desirable way to help people communicate whenever possible. And there are some reasons that we love voice output AAC, and I just wanted to go over some of those with you. So number one is something that we call in the field, consistency of the motor plan. So motor is another word for movement, right? Motor skills meaning how well you move your parts to do things. And motor planning then is the ability of your brain and your body to sort of coordinate together and execute some movements. Now think about the first time you did a text message with your thumbs, right? You didn't have a strong motor plan. You hadn't had a lot of experience with it, and it probably had a few errors and maybe took you a minute. But now that you've been texting for quite a while, think about how quickly you can spell out those words, add those emojis, and send that thing off. It's probably a lot more smooth and efficient for you. And that is because you have created a very consistent, strong motor plan. All of those letters are always in the same spot on your keyboard, right? All those emojis, the ones you use a lot, are all kind of accessible to you in a little group. That motor plan is something that is very helpful for our AAC users with voice output because the icons and the symbols on that device are generally located in the same place. So it always is this way to get to the I. It is always that way to get to the stop, right? And so it allows that motor plan, just like when you're texting and then when you're talking too. We have established a motor plan. When we say the word stop, we know what it feels like. We have a motor plan. It isn't new to us every time. We're not trying to pronounce a brand new word. We know how it feels to say the word stop. And it's no different with our AAC device users. They create that motor plan, finding what they need on their device, just like you do with your thumbs and your cell phone. So that's one reason we love the voice output AAC devices. Another reason is it allows the language learner to access a robust vocabulary. Robust means big, strong, right? We want our learners of language to have access to, in a nutshell, all the words all the time, right? Think about when you learned how to talk. Were you restricted in your repertoire of what you were exposed to? Maybe somewhat, right? Based on your context, but you had all the words available to you all the time. And so we want to have that and allow that to happen for our kiddos who are using this alternative method of communication. It can be really, really difficult to have a robust vocabulary in a picture book format, right? Because it gets very thick and very big and very heavy. When we use a device such as an iPad or some sort of a tablet device, it is much easier to store a lot of words on that device and make them accessible in folders and in different methods. So it allows our language learner access to a bunch of words, which is what we want. This is how our kiddos typically learn. And we don't want to restrict or limit the vocabulary that our kiddos are exposed to when we're using AAC either. Very important point now, an audible voice. Having a voice output device that puts sound out into the world, actually, it doesn't just help that listener, it helps the speaker as well, because that sound kind of loops right back into their own brain, right? And that just reinforces what they're doing, and they can assess, did it say what I wanted it to? Did it make sense? Oh, I need to use a different word choice. Wow, lesson learned there, right? So they're learning about how to use words, not just because they're picking up a picture and handing it to you, but because it puts sound out into the world, and that kind of loops back into the brain, and it just gives that much more support for language learning. So an AAC device, a voice output AAC device, as I mentioned, is very flexible and very programmable. So we can add in words that are really important to our speakers. If you have an occupation that has a lot of jargon and lingo, you know that not everybody shares all of that vocabulary, and you might have things that you use more frequently than other people do. And so it's important to be able to sort of customize that. And it's easy to do that on a high-tech device where we have all kinds of memory and storage options versus maybe a low-tech book or page or paper, right? An audible voice has greater impact on other people. And I've seen this happening in treatment sessions with kiddos who maybe aren't super good at language. They're not super engaged with language. It doesn't ring a bell to them doesn't light up their brain very much. When they are able to attempt communication and a voice comes out, oh my goodness, it makes a big difference, not only to them, but to people who are in the environment, right? It captures the attention. It is much more of a typical way of receiving information for us. And so it has really good impact. And then finally, it feels more impactful to the user. And that's something that I just brought up as an anecdote for some of my clients. When they are able to select a picture and that's it just doesn't feel like communication, right? Well, all around them, they see people doing this back and forth, and there's sound and there's turn taking, right? So handing somebody a picture or pointing to a picture just doesn't feel as much like communication, I think, to some kiddos. And so when we can allow them to put some words together and hit a button and a whole sentence comes out, whoa, it feels very powerful for that kiddo to be able to have that audible voice come out and say, look at me, I said that, right? It does feel good, and it does engage kiddos more, and it kind of piques their interest more as well. Those are some reasons why I love AAC. So, okay, there are a lot of things to say here, but I'm going to nutshell this. How do we teach communication with AAC, right? Like, oh my gosh, this is so different than what we normally do, right? How do we go ahead and do this? Well, as a speech and language pathologist, we are really good at breaking down challenging tasks into more manageable bites. But in general, what we have to remember, what I have to remember as a therapist, and what I want you to remember as the community, is that we're really teaching the same language, right? The same set of words and symbols and meanings all up here, same stuff. The only thing that is different here is the output, right? Instead of this, it's coming from a different output. Much like writing is another output, or oh, I don't know, sign language is another output, right? Those are all language that we can teach, but they have a different output method. So as a therapist who, has been around for a little while, has a few gray hairs, and really started my career before computers or anything like this was so accessible. Um, I'm not going to lie, I was a little bit intimidated by this device that talked and like, how do I do this? Right. It just the fact that it was a computer kind of made a little defensive wall come up, and maybe you feel similarly. Hopefully you don't, but maybe you do, right? Like this is so different and this is not talking and I don't really know how to do this. Um, but it's okay because it is the same language. And when I realized that when I work on language with anybody, whether it's spoken language or aided language through a device, it's the same language, and I'm going to teach it using the same types of strategies. And so some of the things I want you to know that we think about as speech therapists when we are working on teaching kiddos how to communicate. Here's what we look at. We look at something called core vocabulary, and I'm going to go over these a little bit in separate slides upcoming. Core vocabulary in a nutshell are just the collection of really high frequency words that we use a lot in our language, right? Modeling language. And by modeling, what I mean is just using language, right? Using language as you do things. And as parents and as just people out there in the world, we do a lot of this, right? We talk about what we're doing. We talk about how we're feeling. That is teaching. You have no idea how much impact you're having on your kiddo when you just talk with them, right? And sometimes if you want them to pick up a certain thing, you model that, right? And you don't model the things you don't really want them to pick up on. So you can model quite a bit of really high quality language every day, all the time. Opportunity, what that means is just giving our kiddos plenty of opportunities, chances to practice this new skill of talking or of communicating, right? Just like I would need a lot of practice to learn how to play the piano. This is a whole new motor plan for me, right? We all would need a little bit of practice. And so we want our kiddos to have plenty of opportunities to practice this skill and really be able to kind of entrench those motor patterns and get really good at it. Practice makes much better, right? And finally, context. Communication doesn't just happen in a room like this one. Communication happens out there where we are living and working and dealing with people. Those contexts are a necessary part of learning how to use words, how to use which words when, which words not to use, and how to communicate in different types of ways with different types of people. So that's really important as well. So as I mentioned, I have a slide for each one of those. So this is an example of core vocabulary. This happens to be a core vocabulary page or screen on a high-tech AAC device here. But you can see what I'm talking about when I say high frequency words that we use a lot in our language that carry a lot of meaning and can be combined with a lot of other words, right? So if you have a really good handle on core words like go, see, I, stop, These are really big, important words with a lot of impact, right? And if you have a good handle on these core words, you can combine these with other types of words and vocabulary to create a lot of different things to say, right? It gives you a lot of tools in your toolbox for expression when you have these core words. So we like to teach these core words in speech therapy to our kiddos, not only who are using augmentative communication, but spoken communication too. So you might see us using toys and fun things to work on and to model and to give kids practice in using words like stop and go, right? Hello and goodbye. I and you, eat and drink, right? There's so many core words that we can target, but every time we target those core words, we're giving kiddos more tools for expression overall, because these are words that are used in pretty much all contexts. So that is what core vocabulary is. All right, so this is actually an example of a little bit less core vocabulary and a little bit more what we would call fringe vocabulary. Fringe vocabulary just means specific vocabulary like object names, things that aren't used all the time, right? But they're used, depending on your life, they're used pretty often. So they're important words to you, but they're not necessarily those core words. So for example, as a speech therapist, I have a ton of fringe vocabulary that most people maybe don't have that aren't speech therapists. And you in your line of work may also have quite a package of fringe vocabulary that others may not have. Kiddos have a lot of fringe vocabulary in that they love things like animals or the zoo or swimming. And there's a lot of words associated with each of those things that we can incorporate into a system of augmentative communication, a high output or a voice output system in folders, right? So they can use this fringe vocabulary along with their core vocabulary to be able to express themselves. So modeling, what is modeling language? Modeling language just means using it, right? Being an example, kind of leading by example. I am going to use my language as I tell you what we're doing in the kitchen right now, right? Oh, look, we are cutting the fruit and we are scooping and now we're going to eat it. Yummy. This is all modeling, and we do it all the time as family, as parents, and as caregivers, right? We talk a lot. And that is how our typical language learners and communicators learn how to use that, by seeing it happening in their everyday, giving it a try, and having success with it. That is how they learn it. So you, as a modeler of language, can really do a lot to enhance your kiddos' ability to express themselves because they're really watching. In this case, this person is modeling with a slightly different output method, right? Not this one, but this one. So this person is modeling for this little man how to say a few words on his device, right? So that he then can practice by imitating her model. So it feels a little bit more, what to say, a little different, right? At first to model in this way. But if you just think of it as I'm modeling the same language, but just using a slightly different output, instead of this, I'm doing this, it doesn't feel quite so intimidating. And models can be very simple. So you don't have to know the entire system of the AAC device in order to model for kids on the device. Modeling can be very simple, single words, a couple of words. And honestly, I got to tell you, as a professional who comes from a little bit of the old school, I have learned right along with my clients where certain things are located on their devices, and they have taught me. And so it is really very rewarding. We're kind of in it together. And sometimes our littles who can show that, the teacher, they get to be the teacher. They kind of think that's really cool. So that's another fun thing about modeling, is it can be something that we both do for each other, right? So I also talked about providing opportunities and providing context for practice. And this is no different for our kiddos who use a voice output AAC device. One thing that is largely overlooked, and I want to call attention to it specifically, is that this is this child's or this person's voice. It's their voice. When you go to work, when you go to school, when you go to a movie, you don't leave your voice at home, right? We cannot let we cannot leave our kiddos' voices at home either. It needs to go where they go. That's where they're going to need to be able to communicate, right? Where they go. So voice goes with you. And you can see in some examples of pictures here where individuals are in a variety of contexts using their devices. So the upper left picture, this looks like maybe some siblings or something like that. And it looks to me like the sister or the young girl is doing some modeling for this young man on his device to show him language, right? And they're in a restaurant. So I'm gathering that maybe they're talking about what they're eating, or maybe they're getting ready to order their own food, right? And ordering your own food at a restaurant at our house, that was like a serious rite of passage. When my daughter was able to order her own food at a restaurant, we had arrived. Life was amazing. She was so proud of herself. And she is so independent that it felt so good for her to be able to do that. To me, that I get goosebumps still when I think about those days. You can also see another context here over on the right-hand side. This is a group of kiddos chit-chatting and doing whatever they do at the beach. We're not worried about getting sand in our device. They're very well protected in their heavy-duty cases. And so they're a little bit less fragile than just a typical iPad would be. And they're talking, right? This is a normal everyday context for people to be somewhere and to be talking. And so I love this one particularly because this kiddo brought his voice to the beach, right? Which is what we all have the opportunity to do. We don't want to limit. We don't want to be that limiting factor. We want to enable our kiddos to have their voice wherever they go. And then finally on the bottom, you just see a conversation, right? We have an older gentleman who looks to be using a voice output AAC device, chit-chatting with a younger person, and it looks like they're enjoying a joke. Imagine not being able to tell a joke, right? As an adult who's maybe lost some language skills, it would be really difficult. So giving that, that ability to find the words, communicate how you want to, with whom you want to, when you want to an adult who's lost some skills, that's a really big deal. And it allows that engagement and that ability to connect with others that I think is really important, that I think we all really enjoy. All right. You might be wondering how to get started with all of this. It's a lot when you are finding that you are caring for a kiddo who has challenges with communication, maybe a diagnosis associated, maybe some medical concerns, right? Some complexity. It can be really intimidating to know how to get started with all of this. It's very, very intimidating. And I can remember in my case, thinking that if someone hadn't like stuck a pamphlet in my hand and kind of like sent me off in a direction, I'd still be not knowing where to go. So I want to provide you with just an overview of what this looks like when we get started, and then finally some resources that you can tap into. So how do we get started? Give us a call at MetroEHS Pediatric Therapy. We have a very robust program, and we work with a lot of kiddos who use AAC devices. And in fact, we've helped them to obtain their own devices. So we think it is a very important, highly valuable thing to do, to be able to provide this voice for our clients. And so we're pretty serious about it here. So in general, any visit to MetroEHS Pediatric Therapy, whatever you're seeking, involves obtaining a prescription or an order from a pediatrician. Your child's pediatrician or a specialist of some kind can give you an order or a prescription for a speech and language evaluation, much like they would for a medicine, right? It comes on a piece of paper. That is where we begin. So calling a place like MetroEHS Pediatric Therapy for an evaluation with script in hand, we are able to work with you to determine if you maybe have insurance benefits that can cover some of these costs, and kind of give you a sense of what clinics are available and so on, and we can schedule that evaluation. The speech and language evaluation in a nutshell is looking to find what the barriers are for successful communication for this person. So we might do some standard testing so that we can compare using scores, one kiddo's performance to a whole bunch of other kids of the same age. We want to observe our kiddos in play and engage with them in play. We want to ask parents a lot of questions because we know parents are the experts on their child and they know their child better than anybody else. And we just want to get a really clear overall picture of their communication status. If the speech therapist feels that the child would benefit from some form of AAC, we work with an AAC consultant who can assist us then with obtaining a device. They assist us as therapists, but also our family members in order to see if maybe there is an ability for the cost to be covered by insurance or some other form of reimbursement, like a grant or something of that nature. And then we can complete the evaluation specifically for AAC and recommend a software, what seems to work best, recommend a device. And then once we have that insurance approval, we have a device. And in our case, our AAC consultant is able to come to the home and help our families set up and walk through that device. So it's not just like, here's your thing, right? We want to help you get started. It's really tough to start out with that brand new motor plan, right? You want to get really consistent and have some practice with it. So we want to help you with that. And from that point forward, therapy at MetroEHS would be teaching how to communicate with this different output modality, right? Teaching language, teaching communication. So I know that there are a lot of questions and concerns that families and society in general out there have about using AAC devices for communication. And so I want to spend a second kind of busting some myths about AAC and communication. So let's go without further ado. Here's a couple of really, maybe the top 3 that I hear frequently, questions and concerns that families have. So I want to address those with you today, in case you're wondering. So, number 1, using augmentative and alternative communication is going to prevent or slow down the development of verbal communication, right? A lot of us get really worried that if we present our child with this device for communication, that's going to be the end of the line. There's not going to be any opportunity for our kid to get better at talking. That is a busted myth. Research actually shows that using some form of AAC actually enhances spoken language development. It helps it along. It does not slow it down, guys. It helps it along. Number 1, it provides that sound input back into the brain that kiddo may not have had if he was unable to speak, right? He can hear those words coming. He can hear what his choices are doing out there in the world for him. Is it successful or not? And he gets a lot of really important feedback that helps with language development. Another myth, it's best to start with picture communication and then graduate to a voice output AAC device. And it's really common for us to look at this as the path, right? Like, oh, let's try this core board sheet with all the core words on it. And then if he does really well at that, then we'll consider an AAC device. I'm here to bust that myth today because I don't want to be the limiting factor for my clients. I want to be able to provide them full access to that robust vocabulary that we talked about earlier, just like our verbal communicators have. I want them to have that access as well. So starting with an AAC device with that voice output and that nice big, robust vocabulary gives that access that we are looking for, just like our verbal communicators. And we are not then limiting what they can say. Imagine, for example, if you had to get through the day with a piece of paper with a smiley face for yes and a frowny face for no. Try getting through your day with that very limited options for communication. It's very, very difficult. I mean, it can be done, right? But not without a lot of frustration and, frankly, exhaustion at trying to get your messages conveyed. So much more work, right? We don't want to be that limiting factor. We want to give full access to these kiddos right away. Also, starting with a predetermined location for words on a device can set up a consistent motor plan for using those words. We talked about the motor plan for texting, the motor plan for saying words, no different. You need a motor plan to find words on a device. And a voice output grabs the attention of the speaker and the listener. And we've talked about how important that is for language learning as well. Another myth, when teaching communication with AAC, it's best to start simple with just a few available words. Boom, busted, right? And we've talked about that. We want that robust vocabulary. We want access. We want to presume competence. If you take away anything today, presume competence would be my two favorite words that you took away. And that just means I'm going to presume that you are capable, and I am not going to be the limiting factor in your communication. I'm going to be the expansion of your communication. Presuming competence, giving everybody access to all the words all the time, right? Also, you can organize in your AAC device, and that helps kiddos understand how our language is structured up here, right? We have words that are related and connected to one another, and understanding how those words work together, that is something that we can support much more easily with an AAC device that has voice output. And then finally, it teaches the user about flexibility and self-expression. There's more than one way to say something, right? And the way we say words has an impact on what they mean. If I say words, let's eat grandma and let's eat grandma, right? Same words, very different meanings based on something in the tone of the voice, right? So we have more flexibility when we use a voice output device than we might with pictures. All right, so I just wanted to add in some resources for you if you are curious to learn more about augmentative alternative communication and how you can support your communicator. Of course, talk to your friendly neighborhood speech and language pathologist. We are here to help, but if you are looking for information about how to obtain a device and just how devices should be used in society and the community, these are some really, really good resources for you. The Michigan Alliance for Families is a statewide resource. It connects families of children with disabilities to help improve their education. Talking AAC is a professional learning community. So people like me are part of Talking AAC for parents and professionals who are supporting people with complex communication needs. That's a really good place to begin. Also, the Autism Alliance of Michigan. So for our individuals who have the diagnosis of autism, the Autism Alliance of Michigan does lead efforts to raise expectations and expand opportunities for people touched by autism across the lifespan. So really wonderful resources to get insight, perspectives, feelings, opinions, experience, and community if you're looking for that. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn this back to Dana, who I think is going to be guiding some discussion.
Hi, Chris. Thank you.
Hi.
All right. So this is such great, valuable information that I do appreciate, and I know our viewers will too. So if you have any questions, you can pop it in the chat right now. Otherwise, stay tuned for upcoming webinars sponsored by MetroEHS Pediatric Therapy. Next month's topic is going to be about frenectomy care. Who needs a frenectomy? key benefits, how to get started. Also, follow our social media pages. We're on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all that. Um, yeah, so we will send you a copy of this or a version, a recorded version to send out to you guys. And I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. All right.
Everybody, thank you so much for your time and attention. I really enjoyed chatting with you guys today. I hope you found something valuable in this presentation. Feel free to reach out and enjoy the recording.